we'll do is have a brief review of last week. And last week we began our midweek God Talk series on meaning making. And so we began with this thought. How do we know the difference between a red light and a green light, not just in terms of color, but why do we respond differently to the two lights? The red stop sign says stop. And so we stop because it says stop. But how do we know how long to stop? And the answer is because we have ascribed meaning. We've given meaning to each of these things. And so because we understand what a green light means, not just because it's a different color, but because we understand what a green light means, we understand to go. Because we understand what a red light means, we understand this means stop. And for some of us on this call, the yellow light means slow down, not speed up, according to the books in which you were given your license and or your permits. But the point is this, understanding the correct meaning is literally the difference between life and death. Understanding and interpreting the proper meaning is literally the difference between life and death in our lives, as well as the lives of the people around us. And I want to put the Bible in this context. The Bible is a book of people who are searching for the most powerful thing on the universe. No, not Migos, Cardi B. They weren't chasing clout. They weren't chasing influence. They weren't chasing power, money, or fame. But they were searching for meaning. When you've seen the temple, right? And some of us are seeing certain temples in our lives being torn down as it relates to church and as it relates to work. And so many of them understood the temple and how important it was and the relationship that they had with God through the temple. And so to see the temple destroyed, to understand that their traditions are leaving, to understand that people around them no longer are there, all these things were happening at the same time. And at some point, when you end up taking enough steps backwards, at some point, when you felt and you've endured enough pain, you have to ask this question, either consciously or subconsciously. You ask yourself the question, what does this mean? And so I want to read this from Man's Search for Meaning. It was a bestseller. A really good book. You can purchase it if you want. If you want us to purchase it for you, we can. We consider it to be an investment. But he says something that's very important as it relates to logotherapy, which is a term that he came up with, which is a way to create meaning from the things of life. Somebody who endured and somebody who survived World War II, the Holocaust, actually. He says this, logotherapy is neither teaching nor preaching. It is as far removed from logical reasoning as it is from moral exhortation. To put it figuratively, the role played by a logotherapist is that of an eye specialist rather than that of a painter. Is played by a logotherapist is that of an eye specialist rather than a painter. Get this. A painter tries to convey to us a picture of the world as he sees it. An ophthalmologist, I hope I didn't butcher that, an ophthalmologist tries to enable us to see the world as it really is. The logotherapist's role consists of widening and broadening the visual field of the patient so that the whole spectrum of potential meaning becomes conscious and visible. I'm going to give you the last part because it's a lot, and then I'll give you the Rap Junior translation. We're moving into the realm of becoming an ophthalmologist. I am right now an ophthalmologist rather than a painter, an eye person. You get your eye exam because a painter tries to convey a picture of the world as he sees it through his painting. However, an ophthalmologist enables us to see the world as it really is by examining what we see now and by broadening what we see currently so that we can see more, we can see further, we can see wider, and we can see better as a result of it. I believe one of the mistakes that we've made oftentimes in the church is we've spent too much time painting and not enough time examining vision. And so what we're doing right now, and we'll continue it for a few more weeks, is I'm not trying to give you a picture. I'm not trying to give you a bunch of answers. I'm not even here trying to give you a truth that I'm trying to impose on your life right now. But what I am doing is I'm trying to help broaden your horizons, broaden your understandings, similar to that of your eye doctor, so that by the end of this series, by the end of this class, you'll be able to see further and you'll be able to see a wider array of what the things in your life could have meant. I want you to understand that there are certain times that we believe that an event means one thing, but then later on you understand that an event actually meant something completely different. And so watch this. There's two types of meanings that I want to introduce. These may not be the only two, but these are the two that we're going to cover. And the idea really comes kind of from womanist theology as well as a few other areas. But there's two different types of interpretation we can provide. The first one is we can provide a life-giving interpretation. We can provide a life-giving interpretation. I hope you're taking notes. The first one is a life-giving interpretation. When things happen to us, we have to figure out what the meaning is. The quote goes, life is not what happens to you, but it's how you respond to it. Your response can be one of two ways. Your meaning that you come up with, your interpretation, how you interpret it can be one of two things. It can either be life-giving or it can be death-dealing. Life happens to us. One of two things can happen. We interpret it, we just figure out what the meaning is, and it can either be life-giving or it can be death-dealing. Now watch this. The best way I can give you this example is I remember as I was finishing up at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I was talking to one of my best friends, and I was telling him I had my own plan, right? Anybody had a plan before? I had my own plan, and I felt like I knew exactly what I was supposed to be doing. I overloaded on my work to make sure I could get places early and ahead of time. And so I was at UT Knox. I was overloading on hours. I was writing my thesis early. I had everything in line to graduate early and to try to go straight into seminary. And so I had applied to Princeton, went up there and visited, got to shake a few hands, meet a few people, because there's certain ways that you present yourself when you're trying to get something, when you're trying to network, when you're trying to meet people. And so I knew that if I just applied blindly, I wasn't going to get in. So I went up there. They actually reimbursed my flight ticket, thank the Lord. But I went up there and I met with them. I shook their hands. And, they said, man, can't wait to have you here. Can't wait to read your application. I finished the application. I'll never forget, one afternoon, I was sitting in the Tennessee Fund. I get an email from Princeton. I figured I knew what this answer was. I knew that I had just got into Princeton, Ivy League. My boy, Mike, my college roommate, one of my best friends, was up there, and I couldn't wait for us to be reunited in Princeton, New Jersey. Get a message from Princeton that says, we are unable to offer you admission for the spring semester. You're welcome to reapply for the fall. The fall is when everybody else typically comes in. Typically, everybody else applies. So they told me that basically you're not going to be admitted. Now, watch this. I had my plan to finish that program early. I had my plan to enroll in seminary early. Not only did I not get into seminary, the seminary I wanted to in the time I wanted to do it, but come to find out, I also was not able to, for a plethora of reasons. I also was not able to finish that program early. I was trying to graduate early. I also was not able to finish the program early, so I wouldn't have been able to make it to Princeton anyways. But watch this. I was talking to one of my friends, and there's certain friends you go to for different reasons. So some friends will typically enable you, right? You say you're going on a diet, and they're going to buy you all the stuff that you don't need to go on a diet, and just say have a good time, right? And there's other friends, you say you're going on a diet, and they'll come over and throw all your junk food away. Well, I call one of my friends, and he's typically the one that kind of holds me accountable and things of that nature. And I told him I didn't get in, and he immediately went into, man, forget them. This is the PG-13 version. Man, forget them. They don't understand your value. I can't believe da 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 da. So he's going off in an attempt to make me feel better. I said, well, I didn't call you because I wanted you to give me that. I was just giving you a heads up so that I'm not headed to Princeton. And he said he learned something, in the way that he coined it is how I'm going to give it to you as an example. He said he wrote it in a blog. He was like, I was having a conversation with a friend, heard some disappointing news, and I was trying to help him feel better about the news. And here's what he said. He said, at first, we thought it was rejection, but after speaking to him, I found out it was divine redirection. Now watch this. I had just gotten told that basically I wasn't good enough to get into Princeton when I thought I was going to, right? I could have interpreted that situation as rejection, because rejection, it can easily be seen that it was. I decided to reject that notion, and I decided to say, okay, well, Princeton does not see my value right now. They don't think it's a good fit. And I always believe in every no, there's got to be a little bit of God in it somewhere, right? Some of it may be a lot of man, but there's a little bit of God in it somewhere. I said, okay, well, maybe I'm going to go on this hope of God does not want me there. Let me figure out where the correct fit is. Come to find out, I can't imagine myself having gone to anywhere else for Vanderbilt for my master's program. But if I got stuck on rejection, I never could have applied for what was next. If I got stuck on rejection, I never could have continued moving forward in a way that was life-giving. Why? Because rejection to create meaning from that situation, and to call it rejection, to create meaning from that situation and internalize it as I'm not good enough and internalize it as rejection would have been death dealing. It could have stopped everything that God has planned for me. But I chose, watch this, to give it a life-giving meaning. Meaning, rather than calling it rejection, because for me, rejection just has this big power play. They don't want me. I can't do that. What I did was I said, this has to be divine redirection. Divine meaning God is somewhere in this. Redirection means God is saying, you're moving fast, but you're moving in the wrong direction. So rather than calling it rejection, I chose to call it divine redirection. And I want to say that the ability to interpret the proper meaning for the things that happen in your life is literally the difference between life and death. It is the difference between not completing the project and completing the project. It's the difference between living life lonely and living life prosperous with a few good friends. It's the difference between I quit, I'm not good enough. And it's the difference between, you know what, they didn't see it, but I'm going to keep pushing anyways. It's the difference between that was a breakup and the difference between that might have been a breakthrough. This may be a little bit more sticky. It's the difference between that was a divorce and the difference between that was actually deliverance. It was a difference between they rejected me, and there's a difference between I'm so glad I didn't get drugged through the mud like the person did that he or she chose after me. And so what I'm trying to tell you is, an event happens. You can't control it. I'm not going to say God causes everything. God certainly, it seems like God allows everything. Some things happen that are just pure evil. It's the result of humans being able to do what humans do. And some things will happen, but it's not about what happens to you. It's about what you choose to do as a response to it. And for that, I say, the meaning that we choose to apply to a situation is the difference between stop and give up and continue. It's the difference between something being death dealing and life giving. And here's what I like about God. I said in a sermon once, I was preaching from, I want to say Ecclesiastes, and I was saying that if there's one thing that humans cannot handle, it's death. Humans, we struggle. We do not handle death very well. And I don't think God ever created us to be able to handle death. But God, watch what God did, even in the context of death. God, in God's text message to us that we know as the Bible, it's a long text message, but you ought to read it when you get the chance. God, in God's text message to us, even gave us a new meaning to death because God knew we couldn't handle it. So death could be, oh no, this is the end of the world. I can't go any further. And then all of a sudden you have scriptures that say to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Which one are you going to choose? Death could be, oh, woe is me. I don't know how I'm going to move forward. God didn't equip me to continue life without this person. Or death could be, it could be, I don't know what's coming next. I don't know whether God's going to take care of me. I don't know what the judgment is going to look like. Or it could be like Paul said, my grandmother, one of her favorite scriptures, if this whole earthly tabernacle be dissolved, I have a home eternal up in the heavens, not made with hands, right? And so it's up to us to figure out how we're going to interpret it. And so God loved us so much that even the most difficult thing for us to interpret, God has already given us a solution for it. God says, I'm going to handle death. And I'm even going to give you some text messages to console you in death. And what I need you to do is focused on living a life that creates, produces, and sustains life in ourselves and other people. God says, don't worry about death. You can't do nothing about it anyways, right? God says, don't worry about death. Give death to me. And I want you to figure out what is the way that you can live life that creates life, that produces life, and that sustains life. And I believe that that is our ultimate calling. That is what God has placed us here to do. That is what John 10:10, Jesus says, I come that you might have life. One of our scriptures for the church, and you might have it more abundantly. Jesus says, I am going, even look at, we talked about it last week, but it's a good enough example to use any week. At one point, the crucifixion, the event looked like it was death dealing. But at another season, we realized it was actually life-giving. As Christ was losing his life, he was giving us, as Christ was losing his life, he was giving us his life. And even at the point where they thought they had taken his life, he gave up his life so that again, he could come back and take his life back from who thought they took it from. And I'm not preaching, but I wish I could take a second to say somebody thought they took something from you and you still have it, because God is able to restore and renew. The crucifixion is an example of something may mean something one day and mean something completely different another day. And at some point, we're going to ask the question, has there ever been a time where you realized something meant one thing and then come to find out as you matured, as you continue to walk and observe, as you continue to keep tabs, you realize that maybe it meant something else? And so here's what I want us to get. In everything that happens to us, we have one or two ways we can respond as it relates to creating meaning. You're going to have to create meaning to it. You're trying to figure out meaning for the hurt. You're trying to figure out meaning for the tears. You're trying to figure out meaning for the way that you feel, meaning for the highs, the joys, the low, right? All the above. And there's only two ways that I really want to suggest. There's only two ways that we can interpret it, and two types of meaning we can give to it. We can give something a meaning that deals us death, and that deals us further depression, and that deals us a path that's further towards destruction. Or rather than choosing the route that leads towards death, we need to be searching for an interpretation that breathes and that breeds new and more life. And so that one sentence, if you get that one sentence, you have the entire lesson. We have one or two ways we can respond. We can respond in a way, we can create meaning from it that's death dealing. I'm not good enough. Meaning that's death dealing. This is never going to work out. Meaning that's death dealing. I'm going to die lonely. Meaning that's death dealing. I'm never going to get the promotion. Meaning that's death dealing. Schools will never be able to accept me because of my past. Meaning that's death dealing. I could never start my own company, although I'm running somebody else's, because I don't have the capital to start it. Meaning that is death dealing. We can come up with excuses and meaning. And it could be a true meaning if that's where you choose to place truth. But for me, I choose anything that deals death and does not breathe life is not true. Because if God can create life out of death, then that lets me know that anytime there's something I'm dealing with that only gives me death, then that means it's incomplete, and that the truth is not yet complete, that God is not yet finished with it. And so it's only one of two things. It can either be death dealing or it can be life giving. And remember the difference, the meaning, symbols. Meaning means so much. It's the difference between life and death. And what I want us to do is certain thoughts are death dealing, are negative, are terrible. And what I want us to do is make sure that we do not internalize any meaning that is death dealing. We do not internalize any meaning that is death dealing. It does not mean death dealing interpretations do not come up. And again, death dealing just means something that by the time you process it and internalize it, you're in a worse place than you were before. Something that questions the reality of God, something that questions the power of God, something that questions your agency in the situation. We have regular thoughts that are death dealing. Our job is not to internalize it, but to reject it. I remember I went and seen a therapist in a transition of life, and I was talking to her, and she wasn't even supposed to be my therapist yet, but she gave me the best therapeutic advice she could. She said, when I hear your situation, I hear what you're going through, I need you to know You cannot help how other people hear. You cannot help how other people internalize and interpret what you say. The only person you have control over on how you can internalize things is yourself. I can't help how somebody internalizes what I try to tell them. I can't help how somebody tries to interpret what I tell them. But what I can do is everything that happens to me, I have the ability to choose to say, this is what it means and this isn't what it means. And I'm never going to choose a meaning for something that does not have God in it and does not confirm the reality that God is with us in our suffering and God ultimately has a plan for our good. And so my suggestion is, as we get ready to break off, do not finish the process of finding meaning too early. Because again, an event can mean one thing on one day and then come back a little time later and it can mean something else. And I was taking a nap earlier, and in my normal prayer time, I remember, here's how you knew I grew up real Church of Christ. At some point in our prayers, we start saying, God, forgive us of the sins known and unknown, right? The ones that we did by commission and the ones by omission. And literally my words today were different by just result of studying, making meaning and understanding the importance of it. My words for what I asked for forgiveness for today was not for the typical, for my sins known and unknown, for the sins by commission and sins by omission. My prayer today was, forgive me of any interactions where I should have been helping bring life into the situation, but instead I decided to do something that created a death dealing environment. And I think that when you talk about our call as Christians, our call as humans, our call to the humanity around us, our ultimate call is to make sure that we recognize the life that God has given us, how precious it is, how valuable it is, but also understand that in every interaction people come into contact, every time somebody comes into contact with us, our duty and our responsibility is to make sure that as a result of that exchange, they feel a jolt of life. And this is part of our sermon series. I don't know how well I'm getting it across to you, but the title is It's on Purpose. And it's this idea that for a long time, we thought evangelism is something you snap into. It's something you go out of your way to do. No, evangelism is something that you do right now in your everyday routine with the people that you speak to currently. Evangelism is what you do right now. And it starts with making sure every interaction that you have with people leads to life. And so, again, before I prayed, my words just shifted as a result of what we're studying. And I said, God, I don't want to be held responsible for the times where you place me in somebody's life to make sure that they felt life and that they experienced a new life. But instead, the experience was death dealing. And in all of our conversations, in all of our interactions, and all of our environments, we have to hold ourselves responsible for the times where God placed us there to be the light. God placed us there so that people can experience life, but instead of being life-giving, we chose to be death-dealing. I'm about to shut off the first portion, but I want to leave you with this. Even in our interpretations of the Bible, I never interpret a scripture that's not life-giving, because God is a God of life. God is a God of life that God even said, even in death, I'm giving life. I'm giving eternal life, even in death. So if God has never been a God of death with no life, then how is it that we can open up God's word and read some commentaries or come to our own conclusion that this means something that should be dealing me death? In our interpretations of the Bible, it needs to be fresh and life-giving. But just as much as the Bible needs that interpretation, we also must know that in our personal life, as we're trying to unpack and unravel trauma and different things that we've experienced and different things that we feel, we have to understand that anytime we interpret it, we have a choice. We can choose to interpret it in a way that deals death, that deals doom, that deals despair, or we can choose to interpret it in a way that breathes life. I believe that God has obviously chosen which of those he wants us to choose for ourselves. And ultimately, now it's up to us to figure out which of those we're going to use to interpret in our own lives.